Welcome, friends. Come on in and settle yourself beneath a warm blanket, with your head resting easily against the pillow and the last soft light of evening fading from the room around you. Whether you're lying quietly in bed, curled into a familiar chair, or simply allowing the noise of the day to loosen its hold, I am glad you are here. There is no need to hurry now. Beyond the window, the world has begun to grow still. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these journeys into the past, and let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. It is comforting to imagine these stories travelling softly through many rooms, across towns and coastlines, while lamps are dimmed, blankets are drawn closer, and the quiet hours deepen. Tonight, we're stepping back into a world of stone walls, narrow stairways, painted chambers, and heavy oak doors. We're travelling into the private heart of a medieval royal residence, where the public splendour of kingship slowly gives way to guarded corridors and whispered permission. Beyond the great hall, beyond the chapel and the rooms crowded with petitioners, clerks, servants, ambassadors, and nobles, there lay a more secluded place. At its centre stood the royal bedchamber, not merely a room for sleep, but a protected space where ceremony, vulnerability, and power met behind curtains and locked doors. To reach it, one first had to pass through the outer life of the castle. The great hall was often the most visible chamber, a high-roofed room darkened by smoke and brightened by firelight, where meals were served upon trestle tables and where the king might sit beneath a canopy on a raised dais. Rushes covered parts of the floor, sometimes mixed with herbs such as mint, lavender, or meadowsweet. Whether these herbs truly overcame the odours of wet wool, dogs, wood smoke, spilled ale, and crowded bodies is difficult to say. Moralists complained that old rushes could conceal scraps, fleas, and worse. Medieval comfort was often a negotiation rather than a condition. From the hall, movement toward the monarch became increasingly controlled. A visitor might be admitted into a presence chamber or an antechamber, but each doorway marked a narrowing of access. Architecture itself performed the work of rank. Broad rooms gave way to smaller ones. Public noise softened into murmurs. Doors became thicker, guards more attentive, and servants more familiar with every face. In some palaces, a sequence of rooms created layers of privilege, so that being permitted one chamber farther inward could mean more than receiving a purse of silver. Nearness to the sovereign was a currency, and the royal apartments were designed to measure it. No single plan describes every medieval court. Castles grew over generations, old towers were adapted, timber halls were rebuilt in stone, and rulers carried their households from one residence to another. Even now, historians continue to debate how consistently certain rooms were used, because names changed and surviving buildings were often altered. Yet the general pattern is clear enough. The monarch's chamber belonged to a protected zone, sometimes reached through a solar wardrobe, or privy room, and sometimes connected to a chapel by a short passage or private stair. The arrangement allowed the ruler to appear before the household when required, then withdraw with chosen attendants when ceremony had ended. The word private must be treated gently here, for it did not mean what it means in a modern bedroom. A medieval king or queen was rarely alone. Servants tended fires, carried water, guarded clothing, delivered messages, opened shutters, and waited within call. Clerks might bring documents for sealing. A confessor could arrive before dawn. Trusted nobles could be admitted for quiet counsel, while pages slept nearby or upon pallets outside the door. Privacy was not solitude. It was controlled company. At the threshold, ceremony mattered. The chamberlain or another senior officer oversaw admission, though titles and duties varied. A guard might recognize a lord by badge or face. Yet recognition alone did not always grant entry. Permission passed through human chains. A request was carried inward, an answer returned, and the petitioner waited beneath painted beams or beside a cold wall until the door opened. Such waiting was part of court life. Even powerful men could spend long stretches in an antechamber, listening to the scrape of shoes and the crackle of a brazier. The doors themselves were practical and symbolic. Oak planks were bound with iron straps, fitted with locks, and sometimes guarded from both sides. Keys were objects of trust. Possession of a chamber key could signify office and intimacy, while losing one might be treated as more than carelessness. No one can quite agree whether hidden passages were as common as later legends imagined. Many castles did have mural stairs, wall passages, and discreet postern doors, but romantic tales multiplied them. The real secrecy was usually quieter, a narrow stair known to the household, a loyal man beside a door, or a message carried by someone overlooked because he wore a servant's livery. Windows also shaped privacy. Early castle openings could be narrow and deeply set, with wooden shutters drawn against wind and rain. Glass existed, but large glazed windows were expensive, and many openings relied partly on horn, oiled cloth, or shutters. A royal chamber was more likely to have fine glazing, painted decoration, and costly hangings, yet winter still pressed through stone. Tapestries softened draughts and transformed bare walls into forests, hunts, saints' lives, or ancient battles. They also muffled sound, creating the impression of a smaller world within the castle's massive shell. Outside, evening bells drifted from a chapel tower, marking an hour known less by the face of a clock than by prayer, habit, and fading light. In the courtyards below, grooms settled horses, kitchen boys carried ash, and watchmen climbed damp stairs toward the battlements. Wind moved along the roofs and worried at the shutters. Within the inner apartments, beeswax candles burned more cleanly than common tallow, though even royal flames trembled when a door opened, step by step. The castle entered night, but the chamber doors remained attended. The route to the royal bedchamber revealed the order of the realm in miniature. Those farthest from power gathered in halls, yards, gatehouses, and waiting rooms. Those permitted farther inward did so because of blood, office, usefulness, favour, or trust. Every threshold asked the same silent question who may approach the body of the ruler. For beneath crown, robe, and ceremony was a human being who eventually had to sleep, to tire, to fear cold, illness, betrayal, and the darkness beyond the bed curtains. And so the first secret of the royal bedchamber was not hidden beneath a mattress or sealed inside a chest. It was the chamber itself, a carefully guarded centre, reached through layers of stone, custom, and human vigilance. To stand near its door was to stand close to the fragile place where majesty rested, where the public figure of monarchy became quieter and more human, even while the castle around it kept watch. Beyond the guarded doorway, the royal bed became the centre of the chamber. It was not merely a place where the monarch lay down at the end of the day. It was a structure of rank, comfort, display, and protection. In many residences, the bed stood upon a low platform or beneath a canopy, its posts rising toward a tester hung with embroidered cloth. Curtains enclosed the sleeping space, shielding the occupant from draughts, candlelight, curious eyes, and noise travelling through stone corridors after dark. The finest bedsteads were often made of oak or walnut, though no one can quite agree how many surviving examples truly belong to rulers. Royal furniture was moved, altered, gifted, and reused. Some beds were dismantled whenever the court travelled, their rails, posts, cords, curtains, and coverings packed into carts beside chests and tapestries. A monarch who slept in many castles might therefore carry part of the bedchamber from place to place, carrying familiar cloth among damp stone. Old smoke and another household's rushes. Before sleep, servants inspected the bed with care. The mattress could rest upon stretched ropes or interlaced cords, which required tightening as they loosened. A rope bed that sagged too deeply offered little dignity and less rest. The familiar phrase about sleeping tightly may have roots in this practice, although historians remain cautious about neat explanations that appear long after the objects themselves. Servants knew how to pull the cords firm, test the frame, and listen for cracks in the timber. Upon this base rested layers of bedding. A lower mattress might be filled with straw, wool, or coarse flock, while a more luxurious upper mattress contained feathers. Goose feathers and soft down were costly. They had to be cleaned, dried, and enclosed within tightly woven fabric so the quills did not work through the cloth. Even in a royal chamber, a stray feather could escape and cling to a sleeve or drift across the floor. Such small inconveniences ignored hierarchy. Sheets were commonly made of linen, prized when smooth, pale, and woven. Linen required repeated washing, beating, rinsing, drying, and folding, all performed by workers. Royal laundresses oversaw cloth from beds, tables, chapels, wardrobes, and kitchens. Water had to be hauled, wood gathered to heat it, and soap made from fat and ash. The whiteness admired in courtly households depended upon heavy labour far from the chamber's carved canopy. When clean sheets arrived, servants spread them carefully, smoothing folds with their hands. Wool blankets followed, sometimes several layers deep in winter. Fine coverings might be lined with fur, while costly counterpanes displayed woven patterns, heraldic colours, or embroidery. Furs were valued not only for luxury but for warmth. Miniver, often associated with the pale winter coat of the red squirrel, appeared in elite garments and furnishings. Though the meaning of medieval fur terms is not always certain. The bed curtains were equally important. Heavy fabric trapped warmth and created a smaller chamber within the chamber. During winter, this enclosed space could become one of the few places in a castle where heat lingered through the night. The walls outside remained cold enough to gather moisture, and breath could cloud the air near unshuttered gaps. Servants might hang extra cloth along the stone or place a screen near the bed to interrupt the draught. Even a royal apartment could not entirely defeat a northern winter. To prepare the bed for sleep, attendants sometimes warmed it. A metal warming pan with a long handle could be filled with hot coals and moved carefully between the sheets. Too little heat left the linen cold. Too much risked scorching cloth or dropping sparks into feathers. Earlier households may also have used warmed stones or heated bricks wrapped in fabric, although evidence varies. The intention was simple. No sovereign wished to enter a bed that felt like January stone. Herbs might be added to the evening preparation. Lavender, rosemary, mint, or sweet woodruff could be scattered among fresh rushes or tucked into linen chests. Some were valued for fragrance, others for their supposed power to discourage insects or protect health. Medieval people did not separate medicine, household practice, and belief as neatly as later centuries tried to do. A pleasant scent might calm the mind, repel vermin, and carry a spiritual association at once. Small cloth bags filled with herbs could be placed near bedding, though whether every royal household followed this custom remains uncertain. The chamber also required practical inspection. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, and mice did not respect crowns. Mattresses were aired when weather allowed, frames were brushed, and linen changed according to household resources. Servants might beat bedding in a courtyard, where pale feathers rose in the sun and settled upon the stones. In colder months, damp cloth dried slowly, smoke entered fabrics, and rush-covered floors held the scent of boots, dogs, herbs, and winter mud. As the hour grew late, The chamber softened under candlelight. Beeswax candles glowed near the bed, cleaner than tallow, while the fire settled behind an iron screen. Outside the shutters, wind passed over towers and bare trees. Somewhere below, a door closed, a bucket touched stone, and a watchman's footsteps crossed the inner ward. The sound rose faintly through stairwells, then disappeared into the fabric hanging around the bed. When everything was ready, the servant stepped back. The sheets lay straight, the blankets were within reach, the pillows had been shaken, and the curtains hung without gaps. Pillows might be filled with feathers, wool, or down and covered in linen before receiving a richer outer case. Some sleepers preferred several, others rested more upright during illness. Physicians sometimes recommended elevated positions for certain complaints, following ideas about the movement and balance of bodily humours. The making of the royal bed was a nightly ceremony built from wood, rope, feathers, linen, fur, herbs, heat, and invisible labour. It created comfort where the castle naturally offered little, and order where cold, insects, smoke, and dampness constantly returned. Long after courtiers had left and petitions had been folded away, the bed remained as the final arrangement of the household's care. Beneath its canopy, the ruler would soon surrender crown and wakefulness alike. While beyond the curtains the fire dimmed, the guards listened, and the castle settled more deeply into night. Around the royal bed moved a small household whose members possessed a privilege greater than fine clothing or a seat near the high table. They were permitted to enter the ruler's private rooms. Their duties brought them close to the monarch when robes had been removed, when illness weakened the voice, when letters were read before dawn, and when the formal language of the court softened into quieter speech. Such access made them servants, companions, guardians, and sometimes powerful political figures. At the head of this inner world stood the chamberlain. Though titles and responsibilities differed from one kingdom and one reign to another, he might supervise the chamber's money, furnishings, officers, and access. In some courts, the office became so important that noble families competed for it, understanding that a man who controlled the door could influence who reached the king. Even now, historians continue to debate how much authority came from the written duties of the position and how much depended upon the monarch's personal trust. Beneath or beside the chamberlain served ushers, grooms of the chamber, pages, valets, and body servants. Their names changed across languages and centuries, but their work remained intimate. They opened shutters in the morning, carried candles after sunset, laid out garments, brought washing water, tended the hearth, and stood ready when the ruler called. They knew which cloak was preferred in cold weather, which cushion eased an aching back, and which visitor was likely to improve or darken the royal mood. A page might begin young, often from a noble or respectable household, learning courtly behaviour through service. He carried messages, held garments, fetched objects, and watched older attendants for signs of approval or irritation. The work demanded silence, memory, and careful movement. A dropped cup in the great hall might provoke laughter or anger. A dropped key within the royal apartments could suggest dangerous carelessness. Boys learned quickly that the chamber rewarded those who noticed before being told. Morning washing was limited by modern standards but often more deliberate than later caricature suggests. An attendant could bring a basin, ewer, linen cloths, and scented water. The monarch might wash the hands and face, rinse the mouth, or have the hair combed. Herbs such as rosemary, sage, or mint were sometimes infused in water or used in preparations for the teeth and breath. Some remedies recommended rubbing teeth with cloth and powdered herbs, salt, or other mixtures. No one can quite agree how frequently rulers followed such advice, but court physicians certainly understood that unpleasant breath was inconvenient during close conversation. Clothing required several hands. Linen undergarments were followed by hose, tunics, gowns, belts, mantles, or fur-lined outer robes according to season and ceremony. Fastenings might include buttons, laces, hooks, pins, and jewelled clasps. Fine garments were heavy, particularly when layered against winter cold. A body servant needed to know how each piece was worn and in what order, for clothing displayed rank as clearly as a banner. To dress the sovereign incorrectly was not merely awkward, it disturbed the visible order of kingship. The wardrobe officers managed textiles, jewels, robes, bedding, and other valuable possessions, often keeping written accounts. Chests were locked, fabrics counted, and costly furs inspected. Cloth could represent an enormous expense, and even kings reused garments or ordered them altered. Worn clothing might be given as a favour to a servant or courtier. Such a gift carried prestige because it had touched the royal body, and some believed that objects connected to powerful people retained a trace of their virtue or fortune. A physician might also enter the chamber, especially at waking or before sleep. Medieval medicine relied heavily upon the theory of four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health depended upon their balance, which could be influenced by food, weather, age, emotion, sleep, and the stars. A physician examined urine in a clear vessel, felt the pulse, observed the face, and asked about appetite or dreams. To modern eyes, some conclusions appear strange, yet careful observation remained central to the encounter. The confessor held a different kind of closeness. He listened to sins that could not be spoken before counsellors, received doubts hidden beneath ceremony, and guided the ruler's conscience before major decisions, illness, battle, or travel. A monarch might seek prayer and absolution. Saints' relics, small devotional books, rosaries, or images of the Virgin could remain within the apartments. The chamber was therefore not only domestic and political, but spiritual, a place where fear of earthly betrayal stood beside fear of divine judgment. Throughout the day, food and drink entered under supervision. A cupbearer or trusted servant might taste wine or ale before presenting it, partly as ceremony and partly because poisoning haunted royal imagination. Some chroniclers claimed that unusual stones, animal horns, or special vessels could reveal or resist poison. Unicorn horn, often believed to possess protective power, was especially prized, though many such objects were probably narwhal tusks. Whether rulers truly trusted them without reservation is uncertain, but belief alone made them valuable. As night gathered over the castle, the privy household became quieter. Pages carried away garments. A groom stirred the fire and checked the shutters. The chamberlain received a final message at the door while distant bells marked the last prayers of the day. Rain tapped against the roof slates, and the courtyards below emptied until only guards and stable hands remained awake. Within the room, familiar servants moved through pools of candlelight, each knowing where to stand and when to disappear. Their closeness created opportunity as well as duty. A servant who delivered a private letter might know of a negotiation before the council did. An attendant who witnessed an argument could carry its memory into another household. Gifts, marriages, offices, and pardons might all be sought through those who controlled access. Yet betrayal was dangerous. The inner household depended upon discretion, and a careless tongue could end a career or a life. The men and women of the chamber rarely appeared at the centre of grand chronicles, but they shaped the rhythm of royal existence. They woke the sovereign, clothed the body, guarded the silence, carried the secrets, and watched the human being beneath the crown. In their hands rested the keys, candles, basins, letters, medicines, and small daily comforts upon which even the highest ruler quietly depended. Within the Queen's apartments, privacy took a different shape. Her rooms were guarded not only by walls and doors, but by a household of women whose presence formed a living screen between the Queen and the wider court. Ladies-in-waiting, chamber women, nurses, laundresses, seamstresses, and trusted attendants shared the daily rhythm of dressing, prayer, correspondence, meals, and rest. Even the quietest chamber was rarely empty, yet the company within it was carefully chosen. The Queen's bedchamber might lie near a private chapel, a withdrawing room, or a small garderobe built into the thickness of the wall. Heavy curtains enclosed the bed, while wooden screens divided one activity from another. A chest could hold linen, jewels, devotional books, and letters. Cushions softened benches beneath narrow windows. Fresh rushes covered parts of the floor, sometimes strewn with dried herbs whose scent rose faintly whenever a hem brushed past. Female households varied greatly between kingdoms and reigns. Some queens arrived from distant lands with attendants who spoke their language, knew their customs, and carried memories of another court. Others found their companions chosen by the king, his council, or powerful noble families. No one can quite agree how much freedom every queen possessed in selecting those nearest to her, because surviving accounts often list wages and gifts more clearly than affection or trust. The ladies who served closest were usually noblewomen. They helped with clothing, accompanied the queen to chapel, carried messages, and sat with her during long hours of embroidery, reading or conversation. Their service was honourable, but it was also demanding. They were expected to observe etiquette, protect reputation, and understand when a conversation was meant to remain within the chamber. A careless whisper could travel from a window seat to a banquet table before the evening bells. Dressing required time and assistance. A linen shift came first, followed by gowns shaped with lacing, belts, fitted sleeves, and outer robes according to fashion and season. Fur-lined mantles offered warmth in winter, and fine veils framed the face beneath jewelled circlets or simple bands. Pins, combs, ribbons, and small mirrors of polished metal or glass rested in boxes near the bed. Hair might be brushed with carved combs and scented lightly with rosewater or herbal preparations. The Queen's women also cared for textiles. Linen had to be counted, folded, mended, and aired. Gowns were brushed clean, hems repaired, and embroidery protected from damp. A garment could take months of skilled labour to complete, and even wealthy households valued careful reuse. Sleeves might be removed and replaced, borders transferred, and old silk cut into pouches or reliquary coverings. Nothing precious was discarded without thought. Prayer shaped the beginning and end of the day. A queen might hear mass in a private chapel or receive a chaplain within her apartments when illness, pregnancy, or weather made movement difficult. Small books of hours guided devotion through prayers to the Virgin, saints, and the dead. Ivory tablets, rosary beads, pilgrim badges, and tiny relics could be kept near the bed. Some women placed written prayers or blessed objects close to the body during moments of fear. Medieval belief did not draw a firm line between devotion and protection. A relic might comfort the soul, guard against danger, and assist childbirth in the same moment. Certain saints were invoked for particular needs, while herbs and charms were used beside formal prayer. Some chroniclers claim that queens wore amulets containing sacred words or fragments of blessed material. Whether these objects were openly approved or quietly tolerated depended upon the court and the clergy who recorded them. Meals in the chamber could be modest compared with public feasts. Bread, pottage, fish, eggs, fruit, or watered wine might be served upon a small table, especially on fasting days. Food arrived through a chain of servants and was often tasted or inspected. The Queen's companions ate nearby or waited according to rank. Conversation might turn to household marriages, petitions from convents, requests for charity, or news from relatives beyond the kingdom. The chamber also functioned as a place of work. Queens received supplicants, dictated letters, arranged alms, managed estates, and recommended people for offices or marriages. A petition from a widow or abbess might reach the queen through one of her ladies. Her response could travel back sealed with wax and carried by a messenger along wet roads toward a manor, town, or monastery. Influence often moved quietly, hidden beneath the language of mercy and household favour. At times, musicians performed softly in an adjoining room, or a reader recited a saint's life while needles moved through silk in steady rhythm nearby. Yet the queen's freedom was limited by expectation. Her body represented dynastic hope. Her behaviour reflected upon the crown, and her friendships invited scrutiny. Curtains and screens offered modesty but not complete concealment. Servants heard the rustle of letters. Ladies noticed tears, fatigue, and disagreements. Guards knew who entered. Even a private conversation might survive in rumour, though those who recorded such stories rarely agreed about what had truly been said. Outside the windows, evening mist gathered over the castle roofs. Chapel bells drifted across the inner court, and the last market carts creaked away beyond the gate. Within the apartments, a maid trimmed the wick of a beeswax candle, while another folded a veil into a cedar chest. Firelight moved gently across painted walls, and the voices in the chamber lowered as the castle settled toward night. Before sleep, the queen might sit beside the bed while attendants loosened laces, removed pins, and wrapped her hair. A chamberwoman brought warm water for the hands and face. Another checked the curtains and placed a prayer book within reach. A small dog, valued for companionship and warmth, might curl upon a cushion near the bed. Such animals appear in courtly images, though historians still debate how accurately these paintings reflect nightly practice. Behind curtains and screens, the Queen's household created a guarded world of female companionship, labour, devotion, and watchfulness. It offered comfort and influence, but little true solitude. Her attendant saw the woman beneath the title tired after ceremony, anxious over letters, amused by familiar stories, or silent before prayer. In that enclosed space, royal dignity remained carefully arranged, yet human feeling was never entirely hidden. As the last visitors withdrew and the heavy doors closed behind them, the royal chamber entered its most carefully ordered hours. Night did not arrive suddenly within a castle. It gathered slowly, through extinguished torches, cooling kitchens, final prayers, and the measured footsteps of servants completing duties learned through long repetition. For the crowned sleeper, going to bed could become a ritual almost as formal as appearing before the court. The evening often began with withdrawal from public rooms. After supper, music, conversation, or council business, the monarch passed inward through the sequence of chambers. Courtiers remained behind according to rank, each doorway reducing the company until only trusted attendants continued. Some rulers preferred lively conversation late into the evening, while others retired early, especially during winter when darkness came before the day's work was finished. Those who recorded court life never fully agreed on how private these final hours truly were. Within the bedchamber, candles had already been placed. Beeswax was favoured in wealthy households because it burned with a clearer flame and sweeter scent than common tallow. Even so, candles were expensive and closely managed. A servant trimmed blackened wicks, removed dripping wax, and counted what remained. Candle ends were not casually discarded. They could be melted down, reused, or claimed as a recognised household perquisite by certain officers. The fire also required attention. Logs were arranged to provide warmth without sending excessive sparks into the room. An iron screen might stand before the hearth, and ash was swept away from carpets. Rushes, or hanging cloth. In colder castles, heated stones or a warming pan had already passed beneath the sheets. The curtains around the bed were drawn partly closed, creating a sheltered pocket of warmth while still allowing attendants to complete their work. Undressing followed an order shaped by clothing and rank, belts, jewelled clasps, outer gowns, mantles, and fur-lined robes were removed and handed to waiting servants. Each piece was inspected before being folded or hung. Purses, seals, keys, and devotional objects were set in their proper places. A careless attendant who misplaced the royal signet could provoke more than inconvenience, for the seal carried the authority to approve documents and commands. Night clothing varied with period, climate, and personal habit. Some sleepers wore linen garments or caps, while others may have slept with fewer layers beneath blankets and furs. Paintings and literary descriptions offer hints, but they cannot describe every chamber. No one can quite agree whether certain illustrated scenes show ordinary practice, symbolic modesty, or artistic convention. Whatever the clothing, warmth remained the greater concern during damp winters. Before entering bed, the monarch might wash the hands, face, or feet. A basin and ewer were brought, together with linen towels. Rosewater or herbs could scent the water in wealthy households. Foot washing also carried religious associations of humility and purification, although in the bedchamber it was often simply a practical comfort after a day spent in stiff shoes, crowded halls, and cold passages. A light evening drink might follow. Warmed wine, ale, or a herbal preparation could be offered, sometimes sweetened with honey and flavoured with spices. Physicians recommended different drinks according to season, age, temperament, and perceived imbalance of the humours. Lettuce, poppy, violet, chamomile, and other plants appeared in remedies for sleeplessness, though strength and preparation varied greatly. Some mixtures intended to encourage rest would now be treated with considerable caution. The royal physician might advise against heavy food late at night, believing digestion affected dreams and bodily balance. Yet noble households did not always obey medical moderation. Leftover meat, bread, cheese, fruit, or spiced wine could appear as a final refreshment. A light observation made by one moral writer suggested that peaceful sleep came more readily to the temperate than to those who carried an entire feast to bed within them. Prayer remained the most important preparation. The monarch knelt beside the bed, before a small altar or near a devotional image. A chaplain or confessor might lead prayers, particularly on feast days, during illness, or before dangerous travel. The sleeper asked protection from sudden death, fire, enemies, temptation, and the terrors believed to move through darkness. To die unconfessed was deeply feared, and night represented a small surrender into uncertainty. The prayers might include commendation of the soul to God, appeals to the Virgin, and invocations of guardian saints. A small cross, rosary, relic, or book could remain near the pillow. Some rulers possessed fragments said to come from the true cross, cloth associated with saints, or stones carried from pilgrimage shrines. Their authenticity was rarely questioned in the same manner as it would be today. Their value lay partly in inherited belief, sacred association, and the reassurance they offered in the silent hours. Protective customs existed beside official devotion. Herbs were tucked beneath pillows, written charms were folded into cloth, and certain stones were believed to prevent nightmares or detect danger. Coral was sometimes associated with protection, while jet, crystal, and other materials carried meanings that shifted across regions. Church authorities condemned charms that invoked forbidden powers, yet tolerated or blessed objects containing sacred words. The boundary between prayer and superstition remained uncertain even to those who lived within it. Dreams were taken seriously. A troubling dream might be discussed with a confessor, physician, astrologer, or trusted companion the next morning. Medieval thinkers inherited ancient ideas that some dreams came from digestion, some from anxiety, and some perhaps from divine or demonic sources. A ruler's dream could gain political importance if it appeared to predict defeat, betrayal, death, or the birth of an heir. Some chroniclers claim that kings received warnings in sleep, though later writers may have shaped such stories after events were already known. Before the final candle was lowered, attendants checked the room, shutters were secured, doors were locked or barred, a cup of water was placed within reach. The chamber pot stood discreetly behind a screen or near the bed, ready for use during the night. Curtains were arranged so they would not brush the flame, and a servant might remain sleeping on a pallet nearby. Beyond the chamber, the castle had grown nearly still. Wind moved through the battlements and along the dark forest beyond the walls. A monastery bell sounded faintly across the fields, its notes softened by distance and mist. In the corridors, watchmen carried lanterns past oak doors, while horses shifted in the stables and settled again into straw. At last, the remaining attendants bowed or withdrew. One trusted servant might extinguish all but a single guarded light. The bed curtains closed, shutting away stone, draught, and the watching world. Beneath linen, wool, and fur, the ruler entered the uncertain country of sleep, surrounded by prayer, remedies, locks, loyal servants, and the fragile hope that morning would arrive in peace. Once the curtains had closed around the royal bed, the work of protection did not end. It merely changed its shape. The sovereign might sleep, but the household remained alert. Beyond the chamber stood guards, ushers, pages, and trusted servants whose duty was to preserve the silence within while listening for any disturbance beyond it. The sleeping ruler was at once the most powerful person in the kingdom and one of its most vulnerable bodies. The innermost door was often watched by someone personally known to the monarch. Rank alone was not enough for such a position. The guard had to recognize familiar footsteps, understand the habits of the chamber, and know who might be admitted without causing alarm. A physician summoned during illness, a confessor arriving before dawn, or a messenger bearing urgent news all required different responses. The wrong decision could endanger the king. The wrong interruption could endanger the guard's career. Outside this inner watch stood further layers of protection. An usher controlled the entrance to the private apartments, while armed men guarded stairways, galleries, and courtyards. At the gatehouse, porters secured great wooden doors with iron bars and checked smaller posterns used after nightfall. Keys passed into trusted hands, and some were kept beneath seals or recorded in household accounts. The sound of a lock turning was part of the castle's nightly rhythm. Watchmen moved along the walls carrying lanterns shielded against the wind. They inspected battlements, towers, storerooms, and the dark spaces near kitchens where fire posed as much danger as any assassin. A single neglected ember could spread through timber roofs, dry rushes, wall hangings, and wooden galleries. For this reason, late-night rounds were concerned not only with enemies but with sparks, open shutters, loose animals, and servants who had fallen asleep where they should have remained awake. Passwords were sometimes used at gates or during military danger, though no one can quite agree how regularly they were required within peaceful royal residences. A guard might challenge an approaching figure and wait for a spoken word, badge, or recognized voice. In darkness, even an important noble wrapped in a hooded cloak could be mistaken for an intruder. Lantern light revealed faces slowly, and caution was usually safer than courtesy. Hidden stairs and narrow passages added another layer of uncertainty. Many castles contained mural stairways built inside thick walls, allowing movement between chambers, chapels, towers, and garderobes. Such routes were practical rather than mysterious, yet they could permit discreet access. Later generations filled old castles with stories of secret tunnels and concealed doors. Some certainly existed. But historians remain doubtful about the more elaborate legends of passageways running for miles beneath rivers and forests. The royal bedchamber itself was searched before the monarch retired. Servants looked behind hangings, beneath furniture, inside adjoining rooms, and sometimes under the bed. Chests were closed, windows secured, and unfamiliar objects removed. The inspection may seem excessive, but royal courts lived with stories of betrayal. A servant bribed by an enemy, a rival noble hidden in the apartments, or a blade concealed among bedding belonged to the imagination of power, even when no immediate threat existed. Poison inspired particular fear because it seemed silent and difficult to detect. Food and drink passed through several hands, and trusted officers might taste them before presentation. Cupbearers, carvers, and kitchen servants worked within a chain of responsibility designed to make interference more difficult. Special vessels, stones, and animal materials were believed to reveal poison by changing colour, sweating, or reacting in some other way. No reliable proof supported these beliefs. Yet the objects offered reassurance in an age when illness could arrive suddenly and without explanation. Among the most prized protective objects were so-called serpent stones, bezoars, and pieces of unicorn horn. A bezoar, formed within the digestive system of certain animals, was believed to resist poison when placed in liquid or ground into a remedy. Unicorn horn was thought even more powerful, though many treasured examples were probably narwhal tusks brought through northern trade. Some rulers drank from cups made of horn or kept fragments near their tables and beds. The chamber guards also watched for dangers less dramatic but more common. A drunken courtier might wander into the wrong gallery. A dog could begin barking at shadows. A loose shutter could strike the wall in a rising wind. Rats moved through storerooms and wall spaces, while cats prowled near kitchens and stairwells. The night household learned to distinguish ordinary sounds from those that demanded investigation. Hunting dogs sometimes slept near royal apartments, valued for companionship, warmth, and their sharp response to unfamiliar movement. Smaller lapdogs might remain within a queen's chamber, while larger hounds rested with attendants or guards. Their senses extended the watch beyond human hearing. A dog growling at an empty doorway could inspire both practical concern and darker superstition, for animals were sometimes believed to perceive spirits invisible to people. The guards carried weapons suited to closed spaces. Swords, daggers, spears, or polearms stood ready. But heavy armour was not always practical for a long indoor watch. A padded garment, cloak, and sturdy boots offered warmth during cold hours. In winter, men stamped their feet upon stone floors or warmed their hands above a brazier. They drank small ale, chewed bread, and spoke in low voices to resist sleep. Falling asleep at one's post was a serious offence, although the punishment depended upon circumstance and household discipline. Some watchmen used candles marked at intervals to judge the passing hours. Others relied upon chapel bells, changes in the fire, or the rotation of companions. Mechanical clocks appeared in some medieval towns and courts, but daily life continued to be measured largely by bells, light, prayer, and habit. Beyond the walls, midnight settled over fields and muddy roads. Mist gathered near the river, and watchfires glowed faintly upon distant hills. Inside the castle, rain whispered across the roof while a guard's lantern moved through the gallery, briefly touching iron hinges, painted shields, and closed oak doors before passing on. If an alarm sounded, the response had to be swift but controlled. Guards blocked entrances, attendants awakened the monarch, and trusted officers determined whether the danger came from fire, attack, illness, or rumour. Panic itself could become dangerous in narrow stairs and crowded rooms. The best protection was therefore preparation known routes, assigned duties, guarded keys, and people accustomed to obeying before asking questions. Yet no number of bolts, blades, dogs, charms, or loyal servants could remove every danger. The ruler behind the curtain still breathed in darkness like any other sleeper. The watch outside existed because kingship could not abolish vulnerability. It could only surround it with stone, ritual, vigilance, and men who listened through the long hours for any sound that did not belong. The royal bed was guarded not only because a monarch slept there, but because the future of a dynasty might begin there. Marriage joined kingdoms, settled rivalries, secured alliances, and promised heirs whose existence could prevent war or invite it. Within the royal chamber, private intimacy was shaped by public expectation. The bed stood beneath embroidered hangings, yet beyond its curtains waited counsellors, ambassadors, relatives, servants, and entire populations concerned with what might follow. Royal marriages were rarely arranged for affection alone. A prince or princess might be promised in childhood to someone never met, perhaps living across mountains or seas. Negotiations considered lands, dowries, military support, trade, inheritance, and disputed claims. Portraits and descriptions were exchanged, although such likenesses could flatter. Some envoys reported upon health, manners, height, complexion, or fertility within the prospective bride's family. No one can quite agree how much personal preference certain rulers were permitted, for power sometimes allowed resistance while duty often overcame it. When the bride arrived, her journey could last weeks. She travelled along muddy roads with carts of clothing, linen, devotional objects, chests, attendants, and gifts. Towns received her beneath bells and banners. Abbeys offered lodging, noble households provided feasts, and crowds gathered to see the woman whose marriage might alter the realm. Pilgrim badges, roadside shrines, and stone crosses marked parts of the route, while winter rain tested wheels, horses, and patience alike. The wedding itself belonged to church and court. Vows were exchanged before witnesses, often at a church door before mass continued inside. Rings, prayers, blessings, and joined hands made the union lawful, though customs varied by region and century. A feast followed, with musicians, spiced wine, roasted meats, bread trenchers, and elaborate displays of heraldry. Yet one final ceremony still awaited the bedding. The bedding ceremony transformed the marriage bed into a public symbol. After the feast, attendants escorted the couple toward the chamber with candles, music, blessings, and sometimes teasing songs. The humour could be broad in less restrained households, though royal ceremony usually remained governed by rank. Men attended the groom, women attended the bride, helping each change from formal garments into night clothing. The heavy wedding robes were removed, jewels placed in locked chests, and hair loosened beneath linen caps or veils. A priest might bless the bed and sprinkle it with holy water. Prayers asked for harmony, fidelity, health, and children. Certain blessings compared marriage to sacred unions described in Scripture. The mattress, sheets, curtains, and coverings had been prepared as carefully as those used for any royal night. But the room carried an additional gravity. This was not merely rest. It was the beginning of an alliance expected to take bodily form in a future child. In some courts, witnesses remained long enough to see the couple placed together beneath the covers. They did not usually observe the marriage itself, despite later stories that exaggerate the custom. Their presence established that bride and groom had entered the same bed and that the ceremony had been properly completed. Those who recorded such events never fully agreed on how long witnesses stayed or how closely they watched. Practice depended upon time, place, status, and the political importance of proving the union. After prayers and formalities, the chamber was cleared, doors closed, guards remained outside, and the couple was left with as much privacy as royalty allowed. Yet privacy could not silence expectation. The bride might be young, far from home, surrounded by unfamiliar speech and custom, The groom might know her only through diplomatic reports. Their marriage had been discussed by others for years, but the human meeting within the curtains could still be hesitant, awkward, gentle, fearful, or cold. Medieval people understood consummation as legally significant in many circumstances. A marriage exchanged through valid consent might be strengthened or completed in the eyes of law and custom by physical union. Failure to consummate could become grounds for annulment, though proving such failure was difficult and humiliating. Church courts heard cases involving impotence, coercion, prior vows, forbidden degrees of kinship, and disputed consent. Medical experts, matrons, and witnesses might be consulted in ways that offered very little dignity to those involved. Royal marriages carried even greater pressure because children were matters of state. The absence of an heir encouraged rumour. Courtiers blamed illness, sin, sorcery, incompatibility, or divine displeasure. Physicians recommended diets, baths, herbs, favourable seasons, and astrological timing. Foods believed to increase warmth and fertility included eggs, spices, certain meats, nuts, and sweet wines. Remedies differed widely. And even now, historians continue to debate how seriously every prescription was followed. Amulets and sacred objects could also be placed near the bed. Couples prayed to saints associated with marriage, conception, or childbirth. Relics were carried into chambers, while blessed candles burned during anxious nights. Some folk practices used plants, knots, written charms, or stones thought to encourage fertility. Clergy might condemn magical methods while approving prayers and relics, yet households sometimes used both without sensing a contradiction. The Queen's menstrual cycle became a matter of quiet attention. Chamber women knew changes in routine, appetite, mood, and health before physicians or counsellors did. A missed cycle could awaken hope, but confirmation came slowly, until pregnancy appeared certain. Rumours moved carefully through the apartments. A servant might notice that wine had been refused, that certain foods caused discomfort, or that the Queen tired during Mass. Such observations could travel farther than intended. For the king, failure to produce an heir threatened more than personal pride. It endangered succession. Brothers, cousins, and rival branches of the family watched closely. A daughter could inherit in some realms and circumstances, but her claim might be challenged. A son promised continuity, though even a male heir could die young in a world of fever, infection, and uncertain medicine. Every royal birth was therefore preceded by months or years of expectation centred upon the marriage bed. Outside the chamber, winter wind moved along the battlements. In the chapel, a final lamp burned before a saint's image. Servants crossed the courtyard carrying folded linen, while horses breathed softly in the dark stables. The castle seemed quiet. Yet behind many doors people considered the same unanswered question: would this union preserve the peace? The marriage bed could hold tenderness, duty, disappointment, companionship, or political strain. Some royal couples became devoted partners. Others lived largely apart, meeting when ceremony or the hope of children required it. Chroniclers often judged them according to later events, praising harmony when heirs survived and inventing moral failure when dynasties faltered. Beneath the canopy, however, grand policy became human uncertainty. Two people lay within a bed arranged by servants and blessed by priests, surrounded by the hopes of households they could not see. Beyond the curtains waited the future of a name, a crown, and perhaps a kingdom, while the night itself remained as silent and unknowable as any other. When the first signs of pregnancy became difficult to conceal, the Queen's bedchamber slowly changed. What had been a place of ordinary sleep, prayer, dressing, and private counsel became the guarded centre of dynastic hope. Physicians watched her appetite and complexion, ladies-in-waiting noted fatigue, swelling, and changes in movement. Chaplains added special prayers, while messengers carried cautious news to relatives, allies, and religious houses asked to pray for a safe delivery. Pregnancy could not be confirmed with the certainty expected today. A missed monthly cycle suggested conception, but illness, stress, travel, fasting, or changes in diet could produce the same sign. Physicians studied urine, pulse, dreams, and physical appearance. Some medical texts claim that certain colours, sediments, or odours in a urine flask revealed pregnancy, though such judgments were unreliable. No one can quite agree how much confidence royal households placed in these tests, especially when hope itself influenced what observers believed they saw. Once pregnancy seemed likely, the Queen's routine was adjusted. Long journeys might be reduced, though political necessity sometimes kept the court moving. Riding over rutted roads and muddy tracks was uncomfortable, so a litter or covered carriage could be used when available. Even then, travel remained slow. Wheels sank into wet ground, bridges were narrow, and nights were spent in manor houses, abbeys, or castles where servants hurried to hang familiar tapestries and prepare clean bedding before her arrival. Diet received close attention. Physicians advised foods they considered nourishing and easy to digest: bread, broths, eggs, poultry, fresh fish, fruit, and watered wine. They warned against meals thought too salty, too cold, too dry, or likely to disturb the humours. Advice varied according to season and the Queen's supposed temperament. Some recommended avoiding strong emotions, frightening sights, or unpleasant smells, believing these might affect the child developing within her. Such ideas made the Queen's surroundings a matter of concern. Her attendants tried to keep the chamber orderly, warm, and sweet-smelling. Rushes were changed more frequently, and herbs such as lavender, rosemary, or meadowsweet were scattered across the floor. Linen was aired, curtains inspected, and smoky candles replaced when possible with cleaner beeswax. Yet even royal apartments remained vulnerable to damp stone, winter draughts, and the odours drifting upward from kitchens, kennels, courtyards, and garderobes. As the expected birth approached, the Queen entered confinement. This period of withdrawal, sometimes called lying in, separated her from much of the public court. The chamber could be transformed into a warm, enclosed world. Windows were shuttered, wall hangings drawn close, and unnecessary openings covered. Curtains surrounded the bed, while cushions, stools, basins, towels, swaddling cloths, and warming vessels were arranged nearby. The purpose was to preserve heat, modesty, and calm. The room was often darkened, partly because birth was understood as a private female event and partly because warm enclosure was believed beneficial. Men were usually excluded except for physicians, priests, or officials admitted under unusual circumstances. The Queen's female attendants took command. Noblewomen offered companionship, while experienced chamber women handled the practical work. At the centre stood the midwife, whose skill rested upon training, observation, inherited knowledge, and repeated experience rather than university learning. A respected midwife knew how to position the labouring woman, prepare cloths, warm water, and recognise signs of danger. Birth did not always take place lying flat in bed. The Queen might walk, kneel, lean against attendants, sit upon a birthing stool, or hold a suspended cloth for support. Medieval illustrations show several positions, though historians continue to debate how closely those images reflect daily practice in particular courts. Herbs and oils were prepared to ease pain or encourage labour. Chamomile, rue, pennyroyal, mugwort, saffron, and many other plants appear in medical and household texts, but their use varied and some could be dangerous. Warm compresses might be placed against the body, and scented oils rubbed upon the back or abdomen. Midwives also relied upon patient reassurance, pressure, movement, and the steady support of women who had survived childbirth themselves. Prayer filled the spaces where medicine could offer little certainty. Relics were brought into the chamber, sometimes from monasteries or cathedral treasuries. A girdle believed to have belonged to the Virgin or another holy woman might be wrapped around the queen or placed nearby. Written prayers could be tied to her body, while blessed candles burned before images of saints. St. Margaret of Antioch was especially associated with childbirth because legend told of her escaping from the belly of a dragon. Other customs existed at the uncertain border between devotion and folk practice. Knots might be loosened throughout the room, locked chests opened, and laces untied because closed things were thought capable of hindering the opening of the womb. Doors could be left unlatched within the private apartments for the same symbolic reason, even while guards protected the outer entrances. Some attendants whispered charms or repeated sacred words whose origin had long been forgotten. Labour might last for many hours. The queen moved between bed, stool, and supporting arms while towels were changed and the fire tended. Outside the chamber, the court waited. Councillors spoke softly, messengers stood ready. In the chapel, priests celebrated mass and monasteries rang bells for prayer. The king might remain nearby or withdraw to another apartment, unable to take part yet fully aware that the succession of his realm depended upon events behind a closed door. The danger was real: hemorrhage, obstructed labour, fever, infection, and exhaustion could defeat even the most experienced attendants. Surgical intervention was extremely limited, and pain relief was uncertain. Some chroniclers described queens showing remarkable calm, though such accounts often aim to present noble suffering as an example of faith. Those who recorded the story rarely preserved the cries, fear, and whispered instructions that filled the actual room. At last, when the child emerged, the midwife cleared the mouth and nose, tied and cut the cord, and examined the infant. The first cry carried enormous meaning. A living son could secure a dynasty. A living daughter might create alliances or claims of her own. Yet before politics returned, there was the simple relief of breath. The child was washed or wiped, wrapped tightly in linen bands, and placed near warmth. Because newborn survival was uncertain, baptism could occur quickly. If death seemed near, a midwife was permitted to perform an emergency baptism using water and the proper words. In healthier circumstances, the infant was carried with ceremony to a chapel or church while the queen remained in confinement. Bells announced the event, and courtiers received news that had already begun to change their calculations. Night settled softly over the castle roofs. Watchfires glowed beyond the walls, and rain traced the shutters of the warm, crowded chamber. Within, the queen rested among folded linen, low voices, and fading candlelight. Beside her lay a small wrapped child whose existence had already become a matter of inheritance, diplomacy, and prayer, though for those nearest the bed, the quiet rise and fall of breathing was enough. Illness altered the royal bedchamber more completely than any ceremony. Curtains once drawn for warmth and privacy were opened for physicians, attendants, confessors, and worried relatives. Basins, cups, folded cloths, medicine boxes, and urine flasks appeared beside the carved bed. The room became quieter, yet more crowded, while every cough, fevered breath, and unfinished sentence was observed by people who understood that the health of one body could determine the peace of an entire kingdom. The first signs might appear ordinary. A ruler complained of weariness after hunting, refused supper, or shivered despite a fur-lined robe and a well-tended fire. Perhaps the face seemed pale during council, or the hands trembled while breaking bread. A trusted servant noticed such changes before most courtiers did. He had seen the monarch wake each morning, knew the usual appetite, and understood whether silence meant thoughtfulness, anger, or pain. Once concern grew, the royal physician was summoned. University-trained physicians possessed knowledge drawn from Greek, Roman, Arabic, and medieval authorities. They believed that the body contained 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile whose balance shaped health and temperament. Illness arose when one became excessive, corrupted, misplaced, or disturbed by food, season, emotion, sleep, weather, or the movement of the heavens. Diagnosis began with observation. The physician looked at the patient's eyes, tongue, skin, posture, and breathing. He asked about pain, digestion, dreams, thirst, and the condition of the bowels. The pulse was felt at the wrist and interpreted through qualities such as speed, strength, regularity, and depth. No one can quite agree how consistently medieval doctors applied the elaborate categories described in their books, but close observation clearly mattered. Urine examination was among the most familiar medical practices. A servant collected the royal urine in a transparent glass vessel called a matula. The physician held it toward a window or candle, studying colour, cloudiness, sediment, and thickness. Medical diagrams divided the flask into regions thought to correspond to parts of the body. Smell might also be considered, though taste, despite later caricatures, was probably used less often than popular stories suggest. Astrology could influence the diagnosis and the timing of treatment. Physicians consulted calendars showing the positions of planets and signs of the zodiac. Each sign was associated with parts of the body, and certain days were believed safer than others for bleeding or administering powerful medicines. Some royal courts employed astrologers separately, while elsewhere the physician understood both disciplines. Even now, historians continue to debate whether particular rulers trusted celestial advice deeply or followed it only when convenient. Treatment often began with diet. Food was medicine, and the sickroom kitchen received detailed instructions. The patient might be offered thin broth, soft bread, eggs, almond milk, stewed fruit, or lightly seasoned poultry, heavy meats, old cheese, strong wine, and salted fish could be forbidden. Water was sometimes viewed with caution, especially when its source was doubtful, so watered wine or weak ale remained common. A royal cook prepared these dishes apart from the noisier work of the great kitchen. Broth simmered slowly in a small pot, while an attendant carried it through passages beneath a covered vessel. The spoon, cup, and trencher were carefully inspected. Fear of poison intensified during illness because familiar symptoms, vomiting, weakness, fever, or stomach pain could easily be interpreted as evidence of treachery. Some treatments attempted to remove harmful matter from the body. Bloodletting was performed with a small blade or by applying leeches. The amount and location depended upon the illness, the season, the stars, and the patient's strength. Physicians also prescribed purgatives, enemas, sweating, or vomiting. To medieval reasoning, these methods restored balance by releasing what should not remain within. To a weakened patient, they could bring further danger. Apothecaries supplied substances gathered from gardens, forests, markets, and distant trade routes: sage, fennel, hyssop, mint, violets, and chamomile might be combined with honey, wine, vinegar, or animal fat. Costly medicines included cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, musk, ambergris, and powdered precious materials. A remedy made for a king could contain ingredients unavailable to ordinary villagers, though expense did not guarantee effectiveness. One famous preparation was theriac, a complex compound believed to protect against poison and many diseases. Recipes could contain dozens of ingredients, including herbs, spices, opium, and sometimes viper flesh. It was aged and stored with great care. Some chroniclers praised it almost as universal medicine, while others remained doubtful. Its rarity and complicated preparation gave it an authority that simpler remedies lacked. Surgical practitioners were called when wounds, broken bones, abscesses, or other visible problems required hands-on treatment. Physicians generally held higher social status, while surgeons and barber surgeons performed procedures. They cleaned wounds with wine, applied honey or herbal salves, removed damaged tissue, and stitched cuts. Pain relief might involve wine, opium-based mixtures, or preparations containing mandrake, though safe control was difficult. Within the chamber, attendants maintained the practical work of sickness. Sheets soaked with sweat were changed. Feather pillows were rearranged to ease breathing. Chamber pots were emptied, fires replenished, and shutters opened briefly to freshen the air. Rushes might be replaced and vinegar sprinkled around the room. Fragrant herbs were burned or placed near the bed because foul smells were believed capable of carrying disease. The physician's authority did not exclude spiritual care. A confessor came to hear sins, offer absolution, and prepare the patient for possible death. Masses were requested at monasteries, alms distributed to the poor, and candles offered before saints' shrines. Relics were brought close to the bed. A fragment of bone, cloth, or sacred wood might be touched to the body while prayers were whispered round the curtains. Royal illness quickly became political. Councillors gathered in adjoining rooms and spoke in subdued voices. Letters were drafted in case the king could still sign or seal them. Heirs were watched, rivals measured, and rumours carried through kitchens, stables, market squares, and abbey guest houses. Official announcements might claim improvement while servants privately feared the worst. Those who recorded such moments rarely agreed upon the exact sequence of events, especially when later factions had reasons to reshape the story. Outside, rain settled over the castle roofs, and the chapel bell marked the hours of darkness. A physician dozed in a chair near the hearth. A page held a candle while a chamber servant wrung water from a linen cloth. Beyond the guarded door, courtiers waited for footsteps and news, speaking so quietly that the hiss of the fire seemed loud. At the centre of all this vigilance lay the patient beneath the canopy. The crown, robes, and public ceremonies had disappeared, leaving a fevered person dependent upon broth, clean linen, familiar voices, and the hope that balance might return. In illness, the royal bedchamber revealed what ceremony usually concealed power could command physicians, spices, relics, and prayers, but it could not order the body to recover. In the deepest hours of the night, when the physician had gone and the last chamber servant sat half awake beside the embers, another kind of danger entered the royal bedchamber. It could not be stopped by an iron bar or questioned at the door. It came through sleep itself, in the form of dreams, nightmares, visions, and sudden awakenings that medieval people often treated with far greater seriousness than later generations might expect. A king who dreamed of a collapsing tower, a bleeding sun, or a crown falling into water did not always dismiss the image as the harmless work of a tired mind. A queen who woke after seeing a dead relative at the foot of her bed might spend the following morning in prayer. Dreams existed within a complicated world of belief, where bodily health, memory, divine warning, temptation, and supernatural danger could all shape what a sleeper saw. Learned writers inherited ancient systems for explaining dreams. Some argued that heavy meals, excess wine, fever, or an imbalance of the humours produced confused visions. Black bile was sometimes associated with melancholy and dark thoughts, while disturbed digestion might fill the night with grotesque images. A physician therefore asked about dreams not merely from curiosity, but because the sleeping mind was thought to reveal the hidden condition of the body. Other dreams seemed too orderly to ignore. Scripture itself contained kings warned in sleep, prophets receiving visions, and messages arriving through the night. Medieval Christians knew these stories well. The difficulty lay in deciding whether a dream came from God, from the devil, from ordinary memory, or from the evening meal. No one can quite agree how confidently individual rulers believed they could distinguish one source from another. The safest response to a troubling dream was often prayer. A sleeper might reach for a rosary or touch a cross kept beside the bed. A servant was called to bring light, and a chaplain could be summoned if the dream caused severe fear. Candles were lit before a saint's image, and the monarch might promise alms, a pilgrimage, or an offering if the vision appeared to warn of danger. Dream books also circulated. Some descended from ancient traditions and attempted to explain symbols through fixed meanings. To dream of clear water might suggest one future, muddy water another, animals, colours, teeth, fire, trees, and falling objects all carried interpretations. Such books did not always meet with clerical approval. Divination could drift toward forbidden practice, particularly when people claimed certainty about the future. Yet even educated courts showed curiosity. Astrologers, physicians, and confessors could all be asked for opinions. Their answers did not necessarily agree. A confessor might warn against trusting dreams too deeply, while an astrologer considered the position of the moon and planets. A physician could inquire what the king had eaten at supper and quietly blame the spiced venison. Nightmares were sometimes understood as physical attacks. The sensation of waking unable to move, with pressure upon the chest and a feeling that someone or something stood nearby, is now often associated with sleep paralysis. Medieval people had different language for the experience. They spoke of oppressive spirits, demons, or creatures that troubled sleepers. Regional traditions described night beings that sat upon the chest, stole breath, or brought terrifying dreams. The royal chamber, despite its guards, could feel vulnerable to such unseen visitors. Heavy curtains enclosed the bed and reduced the flicker of the fire to a faint red glow. Stone walls creaked as temperatures changed. Wind entered narrow cracks and made the hangings shift. A mouse behind a chest could become an unexplained scratching sound. A sleeping dog might raise its head and stare toward a doorway for reasons known only to itself. Small protective objects were therefore kept close. A piece of blessed wax, a relic, a written prayer, or a medal-like devotional token could be placed beneath a pillow or sewn into clothing. Certain stones were believed to protect sleep. Coral carried associations with health and safety, while crystal was valued for purity. Rings engraved with sacred names or symbols might be worn at night, although churchmen warned against inscriptions that seemed magical rather than devotional. Some charms combined Christian words with older habits of protection. A short prayer could be written on parchment, folded several times, and enclosed in silk or leather. Sacred names were repeated in patterns. Crosses were drawn at the corners. Whether the person using such an object considered it a prayer or a charm was not always clear. Even now, historians continue to debate where medieval devotion ended and superstition began. Perhaps because many medieval people themselves felt no need to draw a sharp line. The arrangement of the chamber could also be altered after repeated nightmares. Servants moved the bed away from a draught or a wall associated with disturbing sounds. Fresh rushes were laid. Bedding was aired in the courtyard. Herbs such as lavender or rue were placed nearby. Rue, with its strong scent and long medicinal reputation, was sometimes valued as a protective plant, though it could also be dangerous in concentrated preparations. Incense or aromatic substances might be burned. Juniper, rosemary, or resins filled the air with sharper scents. Pleasant smells were believed to strengthen the body and resist corrupt air. If a nightmare followed sickness, The chamber could be fumigated and cleaned as part of treatment. The same act served medicine, comfort, and spiritual reassurance at once. Royal dreams sometimes escaped the bedchamber and entered politics. A ruler might tell a trusted advisor that he had seen a saint warning him against a campaign. A queen might report a vision before the birth of a child. Chroniclers loved such stories, especially when later events appeared to fulfill them. A dream recorded after a king's death could become a perfect warning that no one had understood in time. For this reason, dream stories must be approached carefully. Chroniclers wrote with moral purposes. They wanted history to reveal divine order, reward, punishment, or the consequences of pride. A ruler who ignored a warning dream and later died in battle made a powerful lesson. Whether the dream occurred exactly as described is often impossible to know. Still, the fear behind such stories was genuine. Medieval nights were darker than most modern nights, and the boundary between sleeping and waking could feel uncertain. There was no electric light to banish shadows with a movement of the hand. A candle had to be found, struck from flame or ember and guarded from draughts. Until then, the chamber remained almost entirely black. Outside, moonlight lay pale upon the towers and winter fields. A bell from a distant abbey marked the night office, its sound travelling over frozen ground and through bare trees. In the royal chamber, a servant shifted upon his pallet as the fire gave a soft crack. Behind the curtains, the sleeper turned beneath wool and fur, carrying images that might be forgotten by morning or remembered for a lifetime. Perhaps that was the deepest midnight fear of all, not simply that a dream might be terrible, but that it might be true. The royal bed was protected by guards, locks, physicians, and prayer, yet sleep opened a door no chamberlain could control. Through it came memory, anxiety, sacred hope, and the strange shapes of darkness, moving quietly until the bells called the castle toward dawn. The deepest secrets of the royal bedchamber were rarely known only to kings and queens. They passed through the hands of servants, a chamber groom who carried folded garments, a maid who changed linen, a valet who removed a stained sleeve, or a page waiting beside the door might learn more in a single evening than a distant noble discovered in months of court attendance. Such knowledge was seldom written down, yet it moved quietly through the household like warmth from a hidden fire. Royal servants handled the ordinary evidence of private life. They carried washing water and chamber pots. They brushed hair, mended night clothing, folded sheets, and emptied basins after illness. They knew when a king slept badly, when a queen had been crying, when a physician returned twice before dawn, and when a meal left untouched suggested anxiety rather than poor appetite. No one can quite agree how often these observations became rumour, because the most successful servants were those who knew when silence served them better. The chamber pot itself, discreetly placed near the bed or behind a screen, was an object of practical necessity and surprising significance. Medieval guard-robes existed in many castles, but a ruler was not expected to cross freezing passages in darkness whenever nature called. Servants therefore carried away the vessel and cleaned it, sometimes before the household had fully awakened. In illness, its contents could be examined by physicians, turning a humble object into a source of medical and political concern. Clothing carried other clues. A torn fastening might reveal a quarrel or hurried movement. Mud on a hem could suggest that someone had left the apartments by an unusual route. Blood, medicine, perfume, smoke, and spilled wine all clung to cloth. Valets and chamberwomen noticed such things because cleaning and repair were their responsibilities. The worn wooden tables of wardrobe rooms became quiet places where private traces were brushed, washed, stitched, and made presentable before the garments returned to public view. Letters were even more dangerous. A monarch might dictate correspondence to a clerk. but truly delicate messages were sometimes entrusted to a familiar chamber servant or messenger. A folded letter could be sealed with wax, wrapped in cloth, and carried beneath a cloak along a muddy road toward an abbey, manor house, or distant court. The bearer might know nothing of the contents, yet he knew who had sent it, when it left, and to whom it was addressed. Sometimes that alone was enough to create suspicion. Seals therefore mattered greatly. The king's Great Seal belonged to official government, but smaller privy seals and signets allowed more intimate or rapid communication. Their custody was a mark of trust. A servant who prepared wax, warmed it near a candle, or delivered a sealed packet worked very close to authority. Some chroniclers claimed that stolen or misused seals enabled fraud and conspiracy, though individual stories are difficult to verify. What is certain is that control of a seal meant control over the appearance of royal will. Chamber servants also heard conversations not intended for the larger court. They might stand beside a tapestry while the king spoke with a brother, ambassador, or favourite. They might wait near the hearth during an argument between husband and wife. Good servants learned to become visually unimportant. They lowered their eyes, moved slowly, and performed some repetitive task while voices continued nearby. Their presence was accepted because the chamber could not function without them. Yet being ignored was a form of power. A valet carrying boots could hear the name of a noble marked for arrest. A maid replacing rushes might notice that a particular visitor stayed long after midnight. A page sent for warmed wine could discover that the king was meeting someone absent from the official audience lists. Information gathered accidentally could later become useful, especially in a court where alliances shifted and favour was never guaranteed. This made servants targets for gifts. A noble seeking private access might offer money, clothing, or a promise of advancement to someone near the chamber door. A petitioner could ask a lady-in-waiting to place a letter where the queen would notice it. A foreign ambassador might cultivate a cupbearer or clerk with repeated kindness. Not every gift was a bribe. Gift-giving formed part of medieval social life. Even now, historians continue to debate where courtesy ended and corruption began. The safest servants understood that obvious greed was dangerous. Sudden wealth invited questions. A fine fur cloak worn by a man earning modest wages could attract more attention than he desired. Favours were therefore sometimes hidden in appointments, marriages, pardons, or promises for relatives. A brother might receive a minor office. A daughter could be placed in a respectable household. Such rewards left fewer coins clinking in a purse. Discretion was expected, but household gossip never disappeared. In kitchens, laundries, stables, and gatehouses, people compared observations. A laundress knew that extra sheets had been requested. A cook knew that the queen had suddenly refused certain foods. A groom saw a messenger arrive on a tired horse before sunrise. Separately, these details meant little. Together, they could reveal pregnancy, sickness, secret negotiation, or fear. Rumour moved from servant to servant, then into market squares and village inns. A cart driver repeated what a stable boy had heard. A pilgrim carried the story to the next town. By the time it reached an abbey guest house several days away, the king's mild fever might have become a fatal illness, or a private disagreement might have grown into a tale of treason. Medieval news travelled slowly, but imagination often moved ahead of it. For this reason, royal households sometimes attempted to control information. Servants could be ordered not to speak of illness, childbirth, or political meetings. Doors were watched, messengers selected carefully, and official announcements prepared. Oaths of loyalty bound household officers, while betrayal could be punished through dismissal, imprisonment, loss of property, or worse. Those closest to the sovereign lived with the knowledge that a careless word might become dangerous once repeated by the wrong person. At night, The castle offered countless quiet corners for whispers. 2 servants might pause beside a watchfire in the lower court. A chamber woman could speak softly to a cousin near the chapel door. Rain drummed upon wooden roofs, and distant bells measured the dark while information changed shape from one voice to another. Above them, the royal apartments remained lit by a few guarded candles, appearing silent from the courtyard below. Some servants carried secrets to the grave. Years of intimate service created bonds that went beyond wages. A body servant might remain with a ruler through illness, defeat, exile, and old age. Familiarity could produce loyalty difficult for courtiers to understand. The servant had seen the sovereign without ceremony, perhaps frightened after a nightmare or too weak to stand, and protected those moments because they belonged to a private human relationship. Others eventually spoke. Later memoirs, chronicles, legal testimony, and household stories preserve fragments of chamber life, though memory and self-interest complicate them. A former servant might exaggerate closeness to increase his importance. A hostile writer could turn ordinary behavior into scandal. Those who recorded the story never fully agreed because secrets, once exposed, were often reshaped by the person telling them. Still, beneath all uncertainty remained one simple truth. The royal bedchamber depended upon people who carried away its linen, opened its shutters, guarded its letters, and stood quietly beside its walls. They possessed no crown, yet they touched the objects of kingship every day. And as the candles faded and another night settled over the sleeping castle, they alone often knew which secrets had been hidden behind the curtains and which ones had already begun their journey beyond the door. Secrets did not always leave the royal bedchamber by accident. Sometimes they were created there deliberately, spoken in low voices by people who understood that the smallest room in the palace could influence the largest affairs of the kingdom. Behind the curtains and guarded doors, the sovereign received petitions, tested loyalties, discussed marriages, and made promises that might never appear in the formal records of council. The Great Hall displayed authority. The bedchamber exercised it differently. There were no long tables crowded with magnates, no herald announcing every arrival, and no raised dais separating ruler from subject. Instead, a visitor might stand beside the hearth while the king sat in a fur-lined robe, or speak near a window as servants withdrew to the edges of the room. The reduced ceremony could make conversation seem more personal, though it was rarely without calculation. Access itself was a message. A noble admitted to the chamber before breakfast demonstrated unusual favour. An ambassador invited inward after supper could report that the monarch had received him privately. A bishop allowed to remain while other courtiers were dismissed understood that the conversation carried special weight. No one can quite agree whether every invitation was intentionally political, but at court, observers often interpreted even ordinary habits as signs of power. Petitions entered by many routes. Some were written upon parchment and delivered through officers. Others came through relatives, confessors, chamber servants, or the Queen's ladies. A widow might ask for protection from a local lord. An abbey requested confirmation of privileges. A merchant sought relief from a toll, while a noble hoped for custody of an heiress or the grant of a disputed manor. The formal machinery of government existed. Yet personal access could shape which matter received immediate attention. A folded petition might rest upon a worn wooden table near the bed, beside a candlestick and a cup of watered wine. The monarch could ask a clerk to read it aloud, particularly when eyesight was poor or the writing difficult. A short discussion followed. Sometimes the answer was delayed. Sometimes a few words of approval sent the request onward to the chancery, where professional clerks transformed a private decision into official language. Seals gave permanence to such commands. Wax was softened, documents checked, and the appropriate seal attached according to administrative practice. Yet not every promise reached that stage. A ruler could speak generously at night and reconsider in the morning. Courtiers understood the uncertainty of oral favour. Those who recorded the story never fully agreed about many famous promises because a private conversation left no parchment behind. This uncertainty made chamber influence valuable. A favourite who knew when the king was calm might choose the right moment to mention a friend's request. A trusted servant understood that a petition concerning money was unlikely to succeed after news of an expensive military campaign. Timing mattered. The slow hour after evening prayers could be more useful than an entire day of waiting among petitioners in the outer rooms. Gifts often accompanied requests. Medieval courts operated within a culture where giving reinforced relationships and obligations. Horses, hunting birds, jewelled cups, cloth, books, relics, and rare foods passed between rulers and subjects. A gift did not automatically purchase a decision, but it created memory. A finely worked object placed in the chamber remained visible long after the giver had departed. Some objects were chosen with remarkable care. An illuminated devotional book might appeal to a pious queen. A hunting dog suited a king known for long days in the forest. Spices from distant ports demonstrated wealth and access to trade. Relics carried spiritual value beyond their materials. Even a basket of unusually early fruit could attract attention in a season when castle meals had grown repetitive with stored grain, smoked fish, and salted meat. Favourites became especially associated with bedchamber politics. These were men or women whose personal closeness to the sovereign appeared to exceed ordinary service. They hunted with the king, shared conversation, received gifts, or entered private rooms easily. Their influence caused resentment because it seemed to bypass inherited rank and formal office. A duke might wait outside while a lesser-born companion remained beside the royal fire. Chroniclers often treated favourites harshly. They accused them of greed, manipulation, improper intimacy, or deliberate isolation of the ruler. Some accusations may have been justified. Others reflected aristocratic anger toward anyone who controlled access. Even now, historians continue to debate whether certain famous favourites truly dominated their monarchs or simply became convenient targets when policies failed. The bedchamber could also host private diplomacy. An ambassador formally received in public might later be summoned for quieter discussion. Without the larger court listening, proposals could be explored without commitment. A possible marriage, ransom, border settlement, or military alliance might be mentioned as a question rather than an offer. If the idea failed, everyone could pretend that nothing official had occurred. Language required care. Courts were multilingual places, and interpretation could be politically sensitive. A ruler might speak through a trusted interpreter, but each additional listener weakened secrecy. Ambassadors therefore valued monarchs who could converse directly in Latin, French, or another diplomatic language. Even then, differences in phrasing created uncertainty. One polite expression of interest could later be reported as a promise. Maps were less common and less precise than modern political rooms might suggest. But written itineraries, estate records, genealogies, and remembered geography-informed discussion. A lord described a valley, a river crossing, or the condition of a castle wall. A messenger reported the mud upon a road or the number of watchfires seen near a border. Political knowledge often arrived through people who had physically travelled the landscape. The chamber therefore connected distant places to the royal body. News from a monastery, market town, pilgrimage road, or frontier manor reached the ruler while he sat only a few steps from his bed. A complaint about flooded fields could be heard beneath embroidered hangings depicting an ideal summer garden. A report of hunger might arrive while servants prepared spiced wine. The contrast was rarely remarked upon, yet it shaped the strange intimacy of government. At times, decisions were made while the monarch was ill. Councillors gathered close to the bed and spoke carefully, Unsure whether fatigue clouded judgment, a seal might be brought into the chamber. Documents were held where the ruler could see them. Rivals later questioned such acts, claiming that attendants or favourites had influenced a weakened sovereign. The closer a ruler came to death, the more fiercely people disputed who had been near the pillow. Queens also used their apartments for political work. A queen could mediate between an angry king and a disgraced noble, recommend churchmen, arrange marriages, or receive foreign relatives. Her chamber household provided networks stretching into noble families across the realm. Requests framed as acts of mercy could achieve what open confrontation did not. Outside the windows, snow sometimes covered the courtyards and softened the castle's hard outlines. Evening bells travelled over white fields, and smoke rose almost straight from village roofs in the still air. Inside, a clerk warmed stiff fingers near the fire while a noble waited for the sovereign to finish reading a letter. The royal bed stood silent behind its curtains, close enough to remind everyone that this was supposedly a room of rest. Yet rest and rule were never completely separated. The crown followed the monarch inward. It remained in the keys held by chamber officers, the petitions laid upon tables, the sealed packets carried out before dawn, and the people permitted to whisper beside the hearth. Decisions affecting abbeys, villages, noble houses, and distant roads could begin in a room where slippers rested near the bed and yesterday's candles waited to be replaced. Perhaps that was one of the bedchamber's greatest secrets. Power did not always speak from a throne. Sometimes it wore a night robe, sat near a fading fire, and listened while one trusted voice quietly suggested what should happen next. The royal bed did not always remain within one castle. Medieval courts moved. Kings travelled to hunt, inspect estates, meet nobles, attend parliaments, celebrate feast days, suppress disputes, or simply escape a residence that had become crowded, dirty, and difficult to supply. Queens travelled between palaces, abbeys, manor houses, and family lands. Wherever the monarch went, part of the bedchamber had to travel too. The departure of a royal household began long before the ruler mounted a horse. Clerks prepared lists, wardrobe officers counted cloth, bedding, and valuables. Grooms inspected saddles and harness, cooks packed vessels and spices, servants folded tapestries and tied them into heavy bundles. Chests were locked, ropes tested, and carts assigned according to their loads. The chamber was slowly dismantled, not destroyed, but transformed into luggage. A bedstead designed for travel could be taken apart into posts, rails, boards, and fittings. Curtains were removed and folded. Mattresses, feather beds, pillows, blankets, and linen were wrapped against rain. Some items went into wooden chests, others were covered with waxed cloth or hides. No one can quite agree how much bedding individual rulers carried on every journey, because household records survive unevenly. But the movement of beds and chamber furnishings appears repeatedly in royal accounts. Familiar objects mattered. A castle might offer a chamber, yet not necessarily one prepared to royal standards. Its existing mattress could be old, damp, or infested. The wall hangings belonged to another owner. The sheets might not satisfy the household officers responsible for cleanliness and rank. Bringing the monarch's own bedding reduced uncertainty and allowed servants to recreate a recognisable private space wherever the court stopped. The procession itself could stretch along the road for a considerable distance. Riders went ahead, followed by officials, servants, carts, pack horses, guards, and household animals. The order varied, especially when weather or military danger interrupted plans. A royal journey was less a graceful line of bright banners than a moving village burdened with furniture, food, documents, clothing, tools, and tired people. Roads tested everything. Summer dust coated faces and cloth. Autumn rain turned tracks into deep mud where cartwheels sank to the hubs. Horses slipped upon wet slopes, and wooden axles broke far from a smithy. Bridges could be narrow or damaged. Ferries delayed entire groups while animals refused to board or river currents rose after storms. A journey described as short on parchment might consume a long day of careful movement. Market tolls and bridge dues complicated ordinary travel, though royal households could claim exemptions or rely upon established rights. Town officials sometimes hurried to repair roads before a monarch arrived. Villages were expected to provide food, fodder, carts, or labour, depending upon local obligations. Such demands could be profitable for merchants and exhausting for communities. Those who recorded royal progresses rarely described the farmer whose hay disappeared into the mouths of court horses. Advance officers often rode ahead to inspect the next lodging. A manor house suitable for a local lord might be too small for the king's full household. Rooms had to be assigned according to rank. Kitchens required fuel and water. Stables needed hay and space. Guards checked entrances, while chamber servants examined the room chosen for the sovereign. Windows, doors, fireplaces, and nearby passages all received attention. Then the work of rebuilding privacy began. Tapestries were hung against unfamiliar walls. Screens divided the chamber. The bedstead was assembled and its cords tightened. Mattresses were laid, sheets spread, and pillows arranged. A table, stools, chests, and a prayer desk might be positioned according to habit. Servants placed basins, ewers, candlesticks, and the chamber pot where the ruler expected to find them. Rushes upon the floor were inspected. If they smelled damp or had been left too long, they could be removed and replaced. Fresh herbs might be scattered among the new covering. Fleas and bedbugs remained a constant concern, particularly in houses used by many travellers. Bedding was sometimes aired outdoors, and bedsteads examined for insects. A chamber servant could spend hours preparing a room that the king would occupy for a single night. Abbeys and monasteries frequently received travelling rulers. Their guest houses offered more order than many roadside lodgings, as well as chapels, kitchens, wells, and experienced administrators. Monks and lay brothers prepared rooms, gathered supplies, and adjusted the regular rhythm of the house round the arrival of the court. Bells continued to mark the canonical hours, though the quiet of the cloister could disappear beneath horses, carts, servants, and noble visitors. A royal stay was an honour, but an expensive one. Monasteries offered bread, ale, fish, meat where rules permitted, candles, firewood, and fodder. Large households consumed astonishing quantities in a short time. Some communities later sought payment or complained about the burden. Even now, historians continue to debate how willingly every abbey welcomed repeated royal visits beneath the polished language of hospitality. Hunting lodges created different challenges. They were often smaller and situated near forests where deer and boar could be pursued. The surrounding woodland supplied game and firewood, but roads were rough, rain collected beneath trees, and carts crawled over roots and ruts. The royal chamber might occupy an upper room with timber walls rather than stone, carrying the scents of resin, smoke, wet cloaks, and nearby horses. At night, the soundscape changed with every residence. In a castle, footsteps echoed along stone passages. At an abbey, bells woke the darkness for prayer. In a manor house, rain drummed against a wooden roof, while dogs moved beneath the hall tables. Near a forest lodge, wind passed through branches and owls called beyond the palisade. The monarch slept within familiar curtains, but the world outside them was never quite the same. Travel also exposed the bedchamber to more people. Local servants carried water and firewood. Monastic officers delivered supplies. Carpenters repaired damaged furniture. Grooms and cart drivers handled chests that normally rested behind guarded doors. Royal officers therefore watched valuable objects closely. Jewels, seals, medicines. and private papers travelled in locked containers, sometimes under direct guard. The risk of loss remained constant. A chest could fall from a cart while crossing a ford, rain could soak folded cloth, a horse might stumble and damage a pack. Thieves watched busy roads and crowded inns, though attacking a royal convoy was far more dangerous than robbing a merchant. More often, small items simply disappeared into the confusion of movement and were later charged to a servant's carelessness. Pilgrimage routes sometimes carried the court toward famous shrines. Royal travellers passed roadside crosses, chapels, and groups of ordinary pilgrims wearing badges sewn to hats or cloaks. At inns and bridges, news moved between people of very different rank. A king might remain guarded and distant, yet his journey crossed the same muddy landscape as merchants, monks, widows, soldiers, and penitents walking towards sacred places. By evening, weariness softened ceremony. Boots were removed, cloaks hung to dry, and servants brushed mud from hems. Pottage or roasted meat arrived from temporary kitchens. The bed was warmed, candles trimmed, and curtains drawn. Beyond the walls of an unfamiliar manor or abbey guest-house, bells faded across dark fields while carts stood motionless beneath the rain. The travelling bedchamber revealed how portable kingship had to be. Power moved along roads, crossed rivers, slept in borrowed rooms, and depended upon carpenters, laundresses, grooms, pack horses, and servants who knew how to rebuild a private world before nightfall. By morning, the curtains would open, the bedding would be folded again, and the slow procession of crown and chamber would continue down another road. Eventually, for every ruler. There came a night when the royal bedchamber ceased to be a place of ordinary sleep. The curtains remained drawn, candles burned longer than usual, and familiar servants moved with a care that revealed more than any public announcement. Physicians had exhausted their remedies, confessors stayed close, counsellors waited beyond the door. The bed at the centre of the chamber had become the place where a reign might quietly come to an end. Death rarely arrived according to ceremony. A king weakened by fever might decline over several days, drifting between sleep and brief conversation. A queen could suffer after childbirth or an illness that no physician could name. An aging ruler might lose appetite, strength, and memory through a long winter. Some deaths came swiftly, others slowly. Those who recorded the final hours never fully agreed, especially when political factions later wished to present the sovereign as either peaceful, poisoned, saintly, or betrayed. When death seemed near, spiritual preparation became more urgent than medicine. The confessor listened to the ruler's final sins and offered absolution. Priests brought the Eucharist as viaticum, the sacred provision for the final journey. Holy oil might be used in the rites for the dying. Prayers were recited beside the bed while servants and relatives knelt upon rush-covered floors, the stone beneath them cold even where tapestries softened the walls. A crucifix was placed where the dying person could see it. Relics were brought close, perhaps fragments associated with a favoured saint or a shrine long supported by the royal household. Blessed candles burned nearby. The flame itself carried meaning, representing divine light and the hope of a soul passing safely from the darkness of the world. No one can quite agree how conscious every dying ruler remained during these ceremonies, but the rites were performed for the comfort of the household as well as the sovereign. The monarch might dictate or confirm a will. Lands, money, jewels, and devotional objects had to be assigned. Gifts to monasteries were promised, alms ordered for the poor, and masses requested for the soul. A ruler who had quarrelled with a religious house might seek reconciliation. Debts could be acknowledged. Servants who had remained faithful through illness might receive clothing, silver, or small pensions. Yet the most dangerous matter was succession. If an adult heir stood ready, the transition could be relatively clear. If the heir was a child, absent, disputed, or surrounded by rivals. Every movement near the bed became politically charged. Councillors wanted confirmation of the ruler's wishes. Nobles watched one another. The custody of seals, treasury keys, and important documents gained sudden importance. A dying monarch might struggle to speak. Those nearest leaned close to hear. A few indistinct words could later become the subject of years of argument. One witness remembered a particular name, another denied it had been spoken. Some chroniclers claimed that rulers made dramatic final commands immediately before death. Historians remain cautious, because perfect last words often survive more neatly than the confusion of an actual sick room. The servants continued their ordinary duties within this extraordinary hour. They changed damp linen, lifted the patient to adjust pillows, and brought cups that often went untouched. The fire had to be fed, candles needed trimming, chamber pots were carried away. A physician still examined the pulse, perhaps more from hope or custom than expectation. The familiar routine of the room continued because there was nothing else to hold back the approaching silence. Outside, the castle waited. News of the ruler's condition moved through corridors without being formally spoken. A cook noticed that broth returned untouched. A groom saw messengers preparing horses before dawn. Guards at the inner doors were doubled. Clerks remained awake beside tables covered with parchment. In the chapel, priests added prayers while bells sounded through the cold darkness. Sometimes the death itself was so quiet that only those touching the body recognized it. Breathing slowed, paused, and did not return. The physician felt for a pulse. A mirror or polished surface might be held near the mouth to look for the faint mist of breath, though evidence for such practices varies. The chamber remained still for several moments as attendants waited, uncertain whether another breath might come. Then certainty settled over the bed. The confessor continued praying. Someone closed the eyes and arranged the jaw. The body was straightened before stiffness made movement difficult. Rings or personal objects might be removed and placed under guard. The royal seal was secured. Doors could be closed while senior officers decided how and when the death would be announced. Secrecy sometimes lasted only a short while. The court needed order before rumour escaped. Messengers had to be prepared, councillors summoned, and the heir informed. In unstable periods, the news of death could encourage rebellion or rival claims. Some royal deaths were therefore concealed for hours or, according to certain stories, longer. Yet those stories are difficult to verify. A silent great hall and guarded chamber door could reveal the truth before any herald spoke. The body was washed and prepared by attendants accustomed to intimate service. Linen wrapped the body, and aromatic substances could be used to slow odour or create an atmosphere of dignity. For important rulers, embalmers might open the body and treat it with salt, herbs, spices, wax, or other materials. Methods varied greatly across centuries and regions. Long-distance burial journeys made preservation especially important. In some cases, the heart or internal organs were buried separately from the body. A ruler could have the heart placed in a favoured abbey, while the body rested in a dynastic tomb elsewhere. Such divided burial seems strange to many later observers, but medieval ideas of sacred place, memory, and patronage allowed the royal body to connect several religious communities at once. The bedchamber was transformed once more. The sick room objects disappeared. Medicine cups, stained cloths, and basins were removed. Curtains might be opened. The body, dressed or wrapped according to custom, was prepared for lying in state or transfer to a chapel. Wax effigies were sometimes used in later medieval and early modern royal funerals to present an idealized image of the ruler when the actual body could no longer be displayed. Mourning entered the household through clothing. Black cloth became increasingly associated with elite mourning in parts of medieval Europe. though colours and customs varied. Servants received mourning garments, walls, chapels, and ceremonial spaces could be hung with dark textiles. Bells rang in measured patterns, telling the surrounding town or countryside that an important life had ended. Beyond the castle, the news began travelling down the same muddy roads once used by the moving court. Riders carried letters to cities, noble houses, monasteries, and distant relatives. Market conversation stopped when announcements were read. Abbey communities added the dead ruler's name to prayers. In village churches, people who had never seen the monarch heard bells and understood that a crown had passed from one mortal body to another. The funeral itself might take weeks to arrange. The body travelled beneath banners and guarded candles. Clergy sang prayers for the dead. Heraldic symbols reminded onlookers of titles held in life, while horses, cloth, wax, and arms displayed royal wealth. At the tomb, prayers asked for mercy, because even kings were believed to face judgment beyond earthly authority. Late at night, after the chamber had emptied, the room could seem strangely unchanged. The carved bed remained. A stool stood near the hearth. Candle wax hardened upon a metal holder. Wind moved faintly against the shutters, and distant bells crossed the dark fields as they had on countless previous nights. Only the sleeper was gone. The royal bedchamber had guarded marriages, dreams, illness, whispered decisions, and dynastic hopes. Now it guarded absence. Another ruler would eventually occupy royal rooms, another household would arrange linen and light candles, and another set of guards would watch the doors. But for a little while, in the quiet after death, the chamber held the final secret of kingship. Every crown eventually left an empty bed behind. And after the funeral bells had faded, after the messengers had ridden beyond the gate and the last candles of mourning had burned low, the royal chambers slowly returned to the ordinary patience of stone. Doors still opened at dawn. Fires still required wood. Rushes had to be changed, linen washed, and shutters pushed back against the pale morning light. Servants crossed the same floors carrying basins and folded cloth, though for a time they may have lowered their voices when passing the bed where a former master had once slept. Another ruler came. Perhaps the old curtains were removed and replaced with cloth bearing different colours. Perhaps a chest was carried to another palace, a carved stool given to a servant, or a feather mattress opened and its filling cleaned for further use. Royal households did not preserve every object simply because a king or queen had touched it. Cloth remained valuable, timber useful, metal worth reclaiming. The practical rhythm of medieval life continued even around memory. A new chamberlain learned the doors, new pages waited in antechambers, a new physician examined a flask beside the window while morning bells travelled across the roofs. The royal seal changed hands, different letters accumulated upon wooden tables. New petitions arrived from abbeys, widows, merchants, noble families, and distant towns where people hoped that the new reign might repair an old grievance. And at night, the bed curtains closed again. This was the quiet continuity hidden beneath royal history. Chronicles often arrange the past through reigns, battles, marriages, treaties, and deaths. One king follows another in a line of names and dates. Yet within the chamber, time was measured through smaller repetitions. Candles shortened, linen wore thin, firewood turned to ash. Winter blankets were stored when spring arrived, then brought back when cold returned to the stone. Monastery bells continued to divide the darkness into hours of prayer. Beyond castle walls, village ovens warmed before sunrise. Shepherds opened hurdles, women drew water, and travellers tightened worn cloaks before returning to muddy roads. At a market gate, a collector demanded a toll. At a roadside shrine, a pilgrim touched a badge and whispered a prayer. At a manor house, Smoke collected beneath soot-dark rafters, while a pot of pottage thickened over the fire. Most of those people never saw the royal bedchamber. They knew the monarch through coins, proclamations, taxes, rumours, justice, war, and the occasional sight of a royal procession moving slowly through a town. The private rooms behind guarded doors belonged to another world, yet the lives within those rooms were shaped by familiar needs: warmth, sleep, food, companionship, health, the hope that a loved one would survive childbirth, the fear that fever might worsen before morning. Perhaps that is why the surviving details feel so strangely close. A warming pan passed beneath cold sheets. A servant checked the latch. A queen placed a prayer book near her pillow. A king woke from a troubling dream and asked for a candle. A physician listened to a pulse. A tired page slept on a pallet beyond the curtains, wrapped in wool while rain touched the roof above him. These were not the grand gestures carved upon tombs. They were the small arrangements of human life. Some royal chambers have vanished completely. Their timber was consumed by fire, their walls rebuilt, their towers pulled down for stone. Others survive only as empty rooms visited in daylight, their floors polished by centuries of unfamiliar feet. Guides point toward an alcove and say that a bed may once have stood there. Historians compare inventories and accounts, trying to understand which door led to a privy stair and which chamber belonged to a queen. No one can quite agree about every room. Names changed, buildings changed, stories grew around abandoned castles, later generations imagined hidden tunnels, secret lovers, poisoned cups, and restless ghosts. Some tales may preserve a distant fragment of truth. Others probably began beside winter fires when an old servant, a local priest, or a traveller decided that bare stone deserved a story. But even uncertainty has its own quiet beauty. The past rarely remains perfectly arranged for us. It comes in pieces: a payment for beeswax candles, a list of linen sheets, a physician's recipe, a servant's wage, a letter sealed late at night. From such fragments, a chamber slowly appears. The fire returns to the hearth. Curtains regain their colour. Footsteps move along a gallery. Somewhere beyond the door, an usher asks a visitor to wait. Then the light fades again. Centuries pass gently when viewed from a great distance. Generations cross the same roads and disappear. Forests are cut back, then return. Bells crack and are recast. Abbey roofs fall silent. Market squares grow around old crosses. The names spoken with fear in royal councils become lines in worn books, and the urgent secrets whispered beside canopied beds lose the power they once held over kingdoms. The bed itself, if it survives, becomes an object behind a rope. People look at its carved posts and wonder how anyone slept beneath so much heavy cloth. They imagine crowns resting upon pillows, though crowns were not usually worn to bed. They imagine perfect silence, though castles were filled with coughing servants, shifting dogs, creaking timber, and bells sounding through the night. Perhaps they imagine too much grandeur. A medieval royal chamber could be beautiful, but it was still a room fighting cold and darkness. Candles guttered, draughts found gaps in shutters, feathers escaped mattresses, smoke stained ceilings, fleas ignored heraldry. Even the finest tapestry could not prevent winter from pressing its pale hand against the outer wall. And yet, there was comfort. There was the warmth gathered beneath wool and fur, the soft glow of beeswax near a devotional image, the familiar voice of a trusted servant, the knowledge that guards stood beyond the oak door. There were herbs among the rushes, bread and watered wine on a small table, and distant bells reminding the wakeful that others were awake in monasteries beyond the sleeping fields. Now the castle grows quiet once more. The council chamber is empty. The kitchens have cooled. In the stable, horses stand beneath blankets, shifting occasionally in the straw. A watchman passes beneath the wall with a lantern, its light moving slowly over wet stone before disappearing around the tower. Beyond the gate, a road stretches between dark hedges. It passes a sleeping village where no candle remains in the church except the small light near the altar. It crosses winter fields silvered by moonlight and follows the edge of a forest where branches move gently in the wind. Farther away, an abbey bell sounds. One note, then another. The sound travels over the fields, growing softer as it goes. Behind the royal bed curtains, all the old sleepers have gone. Kings, queens, chamberlains, ladies, physicians, confessors, pages, guards, and servants have passed into memory. Their footsteps no longer cross the galleries. Their whispered worries no longer wait behind locked doors, but for a little while we have walked beside them. We have watched the candles being trimmed and the beds prepared. We have waited in guarded corridors, crossed muddy roads with the moving court, and listened to rain against unfamiliar roofs. We have stood quietly at the edge of chambers where marriage, birth, illness, dreams, power, and death gathered around the simple human need to rest. And now, those chambers may grow dark again. The fire has fallen to a soft red glow. The last candle bends above its pool of wax. Outside, the bells are very far away. The roads are empty, the villages are sleeping, and somewhere beyond the old stone walls, night continues across the fields, exactly as it did for countless generations before us, quietly, patiently, carrying memory into darkness. Let the doors close gently. Let the footsteps fade. Let the old castle keep its secrets. And let the night be peaceful. Sweet dreams.